from the students sharing their experience. Every year, the LGBTQ Initiatives Office sponsors opportunities for students to attend the Creating Change Conference, which is run by the National LGBTQ Task Force. It is a Creating Change Conference is the largest conference for LGBTQ grassroots organizers, activists, and educators in the country, and so it's important to bring students to expose them to sort of the cutting edge of community organizing and political organizing that they will find among the LGBTQ communities. I think one thing that will become explicit is that there are many communities and many reasons that people go to the conference, and they're here to tell you what they got out of it, and then how they will be translating the lessons back to Colgate's campus. So we will begin by just asking folks to introduce themselves and what year they went, because we have members that went not only this year but also last year. And then if you can, so say your name and pronoun, and then what year you went, and then we'll start off with questions. How's that? Okay. So Christian, they, them, theirs, and he, him, his.
Hi, I'm Madison, she, her, hers, and I went this year.
I'm Taylor. I'm really tired. She, her, they, them, theirs, and I went last spring.
Hi, I'm Bennie. Any pronouns or just Bennie, and I went last year.
Hi, I'm Abel. Team his, and I went this year.
So thank you all. Just to introduce the audience to what Create Change is and what they can expect if they wanted to go or learn more. Why don't you all take a turn to say what you expected, maybe what you had heard about the conference, and then what you found when you got there.
I really didn't know what to expect. I'm one of those weird people who reads their emails, so I saw about it, and I was kind of really interested in it, so I decided just, hey, what the hell, I'm just going to apply to it and see what it really is like.
I'm an intern for LGBTQ Initiative, so I knew about Creating Change, and I think I'm pretty sure I made the application for this year, so could apply. And I don't know, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know that there were such things as conferences based on identity. I was like, oh, I'm queer. I could go to this.
So yeah, I went because my freshman year I really couldn't go, but a lot of my friends went, so I was kind of jealous. So it really became that okay, they had this amazing time there. Now it's my turn to go have this amazing experience that's going to be socially amazing, but also just a good learning experience.
Yeah, pretty much some reasons I was Taylor and Bennie. I didn't know much about the conference, but I knew they went last year, and they were coming amazing things about all the people they met. The kind of the social atmosphere in that conference, and yeah, it was just fun.
What's the most salient, points that you present to Colgate about your experience?
What I think to bring back the most is that accepting atmosphere. Everyone was so so accepting of anything that you put out. Even there are these complete strangers, and you got so close to them in such a short amount of time. And I want to be able to facilitate that sort of environment here at Colgate.
I definitely agree with you, and what I took back from Creating Change is that don't ever be salient with what you think. I'm not sure if I'm even making sense, but there was a protest at Creating Change last year, there was a protest at Creating Change this year, so I'm realizing that everything is up for criticism, and don't take it for granted.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I took away is kind of a combination of this kind of community where it doesn't really matter who you are, who you love, anything like that, it didn't matter. But I think at the same time, we're still critical about who we are, what we do, and how we interact in this world. I think one of the best things for me was, on a side note, this is partially an under protest. it was the bisexual kind of caucus. So like, it was literally the most random thing. Like they came down and they were all dressed in like pink and blue and purple, and they like walked through the entire thing, and they were just like saying like, bi people exist, like bisexuality is a thing, and it's good to be like, to have that kind of support there, but also see like people are criticizing that you're not paying attention. You're basically saying you don't exist, and that shouldn't happen. So I think those atmospheres are the greatest thing I took away from it.
Yeah, definitely creating these safer spaces, because let's be honest, safe spaces don't exist. It's really nice to go to these conferences and find these people who love you and accept you for who you are. And I mean, they're amazing. You get to know a lot of people. You can do a lot of networking there. And yeah, that's fun.
So one big critique of this panel, right, is that we just parade students before an audience to say, you know, I had so much fun, but it can't be accomplished at Colgate, so I'm sorry, I don't want to go back to Colgate. Or I want to go back to the conference. I'm hoping that this is not the message that you all are bringing back to tell us that it can't be accomplished, that you can't have those safe spaces or the community building. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible. It really, unfortunately, it always has to start on a smaller scale before the entire kind of idea at Colgate changes. So especially with these kind of conversations, if we can kind of bring what we learned, say, into WMST and things like this, it's really a very good start to kind of changing the whole campus environment and culture.
I'll be honest and say that I definitely had post-conference depression. I really wanted to go back, but when I came back to Colgate, I realized that it's all about community building, and I then became a leader of Lambda, so that I want to bring what I learned from Creating Change to like the Lambda space, and just being able to love one another without necessarily having to know everything about one another, like just being in solidarity and like just loving everyone.
Yeah, I definitely think it has a lot to do with community. One thing in particular I remember the most was the gender-neutral bathroom situation in the conference, which if you don't know, we're having issues with that right now at Colgate. But I think it's kind of interesting because initially, I don't think I'd ever been into like a completely gender-neutral bathroom. I mean, I've been into one at WMST, but it was like, when it's only like 2 stalls, like, and it's you and one other person maybe, like, that's not really gender-neutral. But when you go into a restroom where like anybody's using it and everybody's using it, it's a different experience. So my when I walked in, I was like struck back a bit, but then I was like, this is fine, this is whatever, like, I don't care. And I think it's about creating those moments, creating those communities where it's like okay to like do those things. Because I feel like one of the biggest issues for people about gender-neutral bathrooms here in particular is that they just don't know how to react to it. But I feel like if you just put them in that situation, they're gonna realize, I don't care, I gotta pee, or like I gotta go to the restroom, or I gotta touch up my makeup because like it's a rough day out, you know? like I think it's really about starting at those small levels and showing people like this is how we could be, this is how we support everybody, and just kind of having everybody acknowledged.
How do you deal with the post-conference depression and try to create a creative change experience here at Colgate?
Okay. So definitely, like you say, building communities is really important, and like you can see at the conference where all these different identities come together. Whereas the personal cause, although they still have they try to work with others to solve their own problems. Anyways, but I can see like here on campus, like each kind of community, each group kind of deals with their own problems, and sometimes they will like go and ask for help with other organizations, and then I think like what Jim has talked about the other day, where we need to build coalitions among ourselves within minority groups to strengthen our forces and our impact here in campus and like.
So definitely, I think we can start to see that there is a similar value in solidarity and coalition building among the LGBT community. I want to share a clip Taylor shared the fact that there had been some protests at each other conference of the last two. It seems to be a sort of tradition that like one of the plenaries or the big workshops that they have planned will be taken over by you know, activists that have come in to draw visibility and awareness to a certain issue that they feel the conference has left unattended to. So you might recognize one like real thing that we often come away from Colgate with is the idea, or not the idea, but some ideas about people to bring to Colgate. So there's lots of sort of speakers and lecturers and activists and stuff that folks want to invite. So you might recognize from this little video clip the members of Dark Matter, which is a group that has been here on campus last year. They're slam poets and activists, and they also were at Creating Change, and we're hoping to bring them back this year. But they were leading this particular protest. So you'll notice that all the orange lanyards that people are wearing, that's conference goers. And the particular issue that they want, you know, that these folks were protesting was some associations that Creating Change made with Israeli or government agents and organizations that were also linked to ICE. What does ICE stand for?
Immigration and Customs
Enforcement. Thank you. There had been a workshop that was canceled after a petition and pushback from conference goers because of they didn't agree with the. In one sense, I said Creating Change is for grassroots organizers and activists, but at the same time, they're building relationships with actual government agencies or government bodies that the attendees, you know, align with institutional violence to many communities that aren't only LGBT, and so the ICE connection was cut off, as the little preamble said, but there still was the presence of the Israeli government in their relationship with the workshop. Now, we're not here to argue that, you know, whether or not that was an appropriate placement, but I would like to see if the panelists have comments about what's pinkwashing, right? Because that's something I learned in Creating Change. What's pinkwashing, And then second, for those who weren't, this was this president, but last year there was the protest was around trans lives matters. There had been a lot of deaths actually in the weeks before the conference had happened. There was even going to be a vigil that ended up getting canceled because the family of the person hadn't really been informed and hadn't been involved in the planning, and they had to scale back. And so anyway, my question is sort of what do you think of the role of activism in the presence of those kinds of spontaneous protests, not only at the conference, but I think I can see, does it make you think in the same ways that you thought about community building, did it radicalize you and make you think I need to come back to Colgate and do some protesting? So either of those.
I think protesting is a very healthy thing. We did it not too long ago here, and it was a really, honestly, it's a really great way to bring the community together around a common goal, especially like even if it's something that you're not really well informed about. Just the presence of enough people that are mad about something to protest about something brings it to the forefront of your mind in a way that just kind of casually offhand thinking about it isn't really going to do.
I think protest, especially as like a activist sort of conference, is like really, really valuable and important because it reminds you to like to be cynical, to be critical, to like really dig deep into what you're being an activist about, or what like topics you support and blah blah blah. And I don't know, I really support that they had like spontaneous protests around Free Palestine. Like, I thought that was great.
So yeah, for those of you who don't know, pink washing is the idea that, well, I only know pink washing in the terms of Palestine occupation, and essentially what it is Israel has essentially become this kind of gay paradise in some sense, or they put out this image of being really gay friendly, really super inclusive, and the idea is that if we free Palestine, all the gay rights will go away. So it's this idea of putting the gay rights label on the oppression of another group. So if you want to think about it, pink washing could happen to Black Lives Matter. You can say that, like, if we do support Black lives, you know, it may cause us like radical homophobia. Like, it's that kind of idea when the two aren't necessarily related. Like, they're two different entities. So pink washing is really kind of weird. There's a lot of different literature on it. I don't know. I'm not an expert in pink washing, but there's this really good movie called The Bubble. It's an Israeli film, and it talks about these issues and like puts it in the like context of like a Romeo and Juliet love story. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, pink washing is this idea of washing over the oppression of a group by saying we're doing this for gay rights, and I want to put clear for gay rights. And going to the activism, I think this activism is important. Something else that happened last year, it was not only trans lives matter, it was Black Lives Matter. And I think these are really important issues because these are issues within their community. You know, just because this is a task conference for LGBTQ people doesn't mean Black lives are not at this conference. You know, that was one of their big issues, that we're talking about supporting everybody in this community, but we're letting people in our community die. Like, that's the real issue. And I think that's what's happening here too. It's just like, we're talking about supporting community, creating community, doing all these things, but we're letting these issues and these problems go untouched and untalked about. Like, we're hurting ourselves when we're supposed to be building ourselves. So I think this kind of activism is really important and it's very good because it makes us look at ourselves and be like, what are we doing as a community? Who are we hurting? Who are we supporting? And what do we need to do to fix those issues?
Yeah, I attended one of the sessions was it was called Reform versus Revolution, and they talk about like what's the ultimate goal about the movement, to just like inform and like do some reformation there and there, or actually revolutionize the system in this country and like actually make change that will benefit like all the minorities and not just a few select. Like my problem with the Creating Change conference and when they were bringing eyes for a panel, I think, I don't know. But yeah, in that instance, they're excluding all the people who identify themselves on the queer. So I'm glad it was canceled. And like the conference, the organizers of the conference, they realized that they made a mistake and they tried to own up for that, but they already fucked up. So why? It's like up to apologize after you made a mistake. It's kind of like, I don't know, it was kind of funny. Like, why did you think it was a good idea in the first place? But
so thinking about the Black Lives Matter and the efforts to try to make the conference more intersectional, either by including or not including different people. The conference also starts off with a Racial Justice Institute that is the only thing that our office requires Colgate students to attend when they go for the conference, is to attend the full day institute. So knowing that all four of you went to the Racial Justice Institute during your particular years, what impact did you feel like that had? Not only going through it the first day, but then how did it have any impact with your experience going through the rest of the conference, the 4 days?
I honestly really enjoyed the Racial Justice Institute. It didn't have, well, there was one thing it had that I really kind of enjoyed. I'm a Latino woman, and I am half white, half Mexican, and they put a lot of focus on being multiracial and putting it in a context of kind of feeling like you're stuck in between both, or you have to be one or the other. And it really kind of being with a bunch of people who felt kind of alienated in both sides of their identity. It was really honestly a great thing for me to say that, like, I am enough. It doesn't matter what other people try to say I was racially. Whatever I say I am, and I don't need to prove that to anyone.
I think for the first half of the Racial Justice Institute, they were like split up by race.
It was like people of color, non-color. It was people of color, whites, and then it was like separated then again into like first time and then been here again.
Yeah.
So there's like 4 topics.
Yeah. Alright, well I went to like the white first timers and I don't know. I felt like it was a good experience. I felt like the facilitators didn't press hard enough on us to like really like focus on our privilege and to like maintain that lens throughout the conference. It reminded me too, because I think I had like a different background from Colgate, but I feel like we just didn't hit the hard topics with like we should have. It was like kind of like a 101, which I don't know, maybe it was good for first timers.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Taylor on this idea. Like, I think the first time, we didn't go to the second time one because obviously we've only been there once. So we can't say for sure, but like definitely the first time was very much like based like WMST 101 or like race 101 kind of thing. But I do think it was helpful in launching these conversations because I think it allowed people to put that in the back of their mind and be like, okay, how can we talk about these issues, understand that race and intersectionality is something that's there, and now tackle these issues. Because I think what could have happened is if they didn't talk about that, race and all these other stuff could have been just swept under to the caucuses that are about race, and that they would have been brought up in anything else. I think that's kind of, that's one thing that's a little, would be unfortunate because I think race and other identities too really play a factor into how we navigate spaces and how spaces navigate around us. So I definitely think it was important, but I also wish it was a little bit further. But again, too, I've only been to the first timer one, so I can't say for sure.
Yeah, I think like this session really made you think about how the structural violence affects not only like me, but like the people that I was talking to like at that session. So like sometimes like it affects us in similar ways, but sometimes it like affects us in completely different ways, and like we don't even realize it. So it's like kind of interesting to hear like the anecdotes of other people and like realize that structural violence affects us more than one way. I think, especially if you identify with other racial identities, like either, and like, I don't know, it's kind of sad, but like the way it affects people, and like sometimes like, you don't even know how to like respond to like what they tell you, because I mean you're in that situation as well. So what do you do?
One person who was able to attend this year but not able to be on the panel had made a point that the Racial Justice Institute was a little bit too U.S. focused, to it understood race and asked you to talk about race in a very Western context, and so I also want to link that to the protests about pinkwashing with Israel, and also with the controversy over ICE being there. I think that that is reflective of my reading of the U.S. LGBTQ movement, the civil rights movement and rights movement. It still struggles to really link our struggle and our fight with a more global perspective, a more international approach. That is definitely a limitation, and one that activists, could help us be accountable for. Any thoughts about that?
Sorry,
just how far do you think is the global reach of LGBT, identities and causes as they exist in the U.S.?
I think that the task force definitely tries, but I think unfortunately it falls a lot on the undocumented queer groups, which are essentially, these are all groups for queer immigrants, typically from Latin America, from what I know, but they could be from all over. I think unfortunately the issues kind of fall on not tell us. I think that's kind of a problem, but I definitely think it's good to say that they're there. Let's have them be in the room. Let's have these undocumented queer narratives in the space, because they are important. I think we don't necessarily hear about queer immigrants all the time. We don't even hear about immigrants all the time, which is another issue. But I don't think we hear those stories enough. And I think putting them in our context, putting them in our sphere is really helpful, especially when even considering a global context of LGBTQ issues, or even just issues in general. I think it's important to have those voices in the room because they exist. So let's listen to them.
Cool. So we will be opening up for questions for folks that might have about the campus climate for LGBTQ folks or issues, or talk about the role of race and racial justice in LGBT movements, as well as globalism or activism. But before we do that, we want to leave you with some last thoughts on Black feminism. One thing, like I said, we often find people that attend Creating Change that we end up, inviting to campus, and Barbara Smith was one distinguished woman that came to Creating Change to talk about Black feminism and its influence on LGBT movement, but also sort of broadly, its impact among activists. And Barbara Smith is definitely one of the folks independently from the conference who will be coming to grace our campus, to a lot of people associated with that who helped make that happen. But this is what she and the panel had to say.
I'm really here to just keep things going.
Barbara is.
So I would like to get started with a basic question. We should not assume that people all share the same definition. And one of the definitions that I think would be really interesting to explore is really what is Black feminism.
So when we started talking about Black feminism in the early 1970s, we were trying to assert that Black women had a right to define their own political destiny and their own political issues. This did not get us much love, I have to say. Many people who created what we think of as a modern Black feminist were also lesbians, were either activists world. We saw that we had to talk about all kinds of oppressions that affected our lives, not just one. And we definitely had a critique and were reacting to the single-issue politics of the white women's movement, the bourgeois white women's movement. We were also critical of the black movement. By that time, it was black nationalism and black power, not civil rights. Of course, inflected by, but they had moved on to another stage. And those politics were generally male-defined. And we also were critical of the single-issue focus of the new gay liberation movement. So we were just trying, as I said, to carve out a place for ourselves, but we also understood that if we were successful, and if we were able to do that, then we would have carved out a space for every other type of individual. But even though we did not necessarily encompass every single identity, we had an analysis and a practice that said that wherever you came from, be you. I love that. That works for me. That kind of mentality, that kind of consciousness, that kind of perspective, be you. We believed that, and we knew that if we could, as I said, get a foothold and get this rolling, that it would make space and revolution for everybody.
Be you was the slogan of the conference. The motto.
So there has been, I don't think I can follow one of the members of Black Feminist. Well, I guess, I can't say, I think the thing that I think about when I think about Black feminism is this moment of just heightened violence for Black women who are trans. The highest I've ever happened this past year, and the year before was the highest before that. And so when I think about Black feminism, I think about how we cannot get rid of gender norms and transphobia and gender binary without getting rid of everything else that co-constitutes it, which is exactly we can't afford to take in this, what I think is like an assimilationist push that transphobia can happen without addressing anti-Black racism, right? Transphobia, you can get rid of transphobia without addressing criminalization of sex work.
So, you see there already some solidarity and linking of struggles. And my final question to the panel before opening up for questions from the audience is, what kind of opportunities do you see at Colgate to link with other organizations or other causes, other initiatives that are going on that might not be single issue, applying to LGBT folks?
Alright, I'm thinking about Diaz talk about how all these different cultural and identity focus groups should come together and have a PowerPoint presentation about your issues, and we should all come together and just hang out. I think that would be great. I keep thinking about how I would like to see people, all the leaders or a member from each group come together and really form a coalition. And yeah.
I'm sorry. We had an open panel last week where we invited a lot of more cultural groups. Not a lot of them attended, but the few that attended, they do want to get together and they can actually talk about these issues that are affecting us on campus, and they find ways to fight for our liberation.
a lot of the groups that we identify with also often intersect with other groups, and really if we bring them into context with those other groups and our experiences and think about them in both ways, through both lenses, and bringing them together, it honestly be a better environment to foster these changes with the intersectionality of it.
Going to the original question, which issues? All of them. I mean, really, let's talk about all the issues. Let's talk about sexuality. Let's talk about being sex positive. Let's talk about being positive. Let's talk about being anti-racist. Like, all these things are connected. Like, they really are. Like, I can't go into all this because that's a whole another brown bag. We can talk about this for hours, but I think we really should be considering all these different aspects of identity and how all that they are related. Because they really are. I can't go into this because that's too much. Like, that's too much for y'all at one time. But like, I really think we need to take a step back and really look at all these issues and see that even though I'm not struggling because of it, if you are, I'm struggling. Like, your struggles are my struggles are yours. We're all in this together. We're all in this together, and we need to be fighting for these issues together. We can't just let them slide by because that's not right. So, question?
Great. So, yes, other comments, questions?
Last semester I went to the Seeds of Change conference, which was about the environmental movement first and foremost, but we talked a lot about the race in the environmental movement and how first-line communities are often people oppressed for their race or because of socioeconomic inequality and these other things, and how the environmental cause is very wrapped up in all this stuff, especially with you were talking about white women's movement or bourgeois white women's movement, and I thought so much about how like the environmental movement for so long has been focused on white upper class farmers and people who have the ability to bring sustainability, buying local, recycling all this stuff. So again, just thinking about the intersectionality and coming together around change in general. I mean, I just see like a global climate right now around the need for change in so many areas. So I would really love to see, you know, the environmental movement work more in social justice, because I think climate change exacerbates all problems that are faced by all oppressed and underprivileged communities.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely think there's a lot of issues that the way we look at the environment affects, especially indigenous groups. I think indigenous groups, this is a real tough issue because I really get upset about this. I really have been the people who have been fighting for the environment the most since the beginning, and they're, you know, like, the issues that we are dealing with the environment affect them directly, and also just affect us. The fact that we commodify farming and raising livestock affects Black health and urban health and people of color, and it affects all these different things and feeds into these systems. I think we have to really, like, when I said all issues, I mean all issues, people. I mean ability politics, environment politics, sex work, positive sexuality, all these different issues relate to are related. Even the rights of animals are related to these issues, and I think, again, it's just really hard to like talk about all these things because there's so much, and like that's, like I said, that's a whole another brown bag. That's a whole other class, really. Like, you would have to take a whole other class to like really break down all this stuff. But I think you really have to step back and think about, what is my positionality? Where am I in this world? And where is everybody else? And when I mean everybody else, I mean everybody else. Think about what the world is, what is happening around you, and who's being affected by what. It's complicated and it's heavy, but it's one of those things that you kind of have to do and just kind of sit with for a bit and then begin to move forward.
Hi. So about the Creating Change panel, I know that you mentioned that the space is kind of geared towards, you know, love and safe space, and that's awesome, great, love it. But also, for the specific conversations that are happening, are they geared towards hashing out, like, what are they geared towards? Are they geared towards hashing out terms? Are they geared towards raising issues with the within the community? I know you talked about the spontaneous protests. Like, what, when you go to the conference and you sit down and people are speaking and you are speaking and there's words, what are the words about?
There's different little workshops that you can go to. I know that I went to one called Desire Mapping, and it was more about like sitting down with yourself and like talking with other people around you about like what are your interests? What are your kinks? What do you want to be called? And, like, all these different things. And like there's another workshop that I went to that was about LGBTQ homeless youth and like bringing up that issues and like how there's a certain narrative that, oh, this kid was kicked out because they were gay. Like there's so many more narratives and that's like the least common one. So like really get into the issues of what, I guess, deconstructing the narratives and bringing the truth. I don't know.
Yeah, I think also there's a lot of, as Christian said earlier, these are really, this conference is made for like grassroots organizations. So it's really about like, it's kind of like what methods are you using to discuss these issues and combat these issues? What methods are we using? This is how we fight this issue and this issue. And it kind of becomes how do the things that you're doing apply to the issue we're fighting? Like how does your fight, how is what you're doing in your fight going to affect or help our fight? So it's like if you go, this is going to sound stupid, but like if you're watching someone like box, you're like, oh, that's a good move. I'm going to use that when I box. That's really what it's kind of about. It's like how do we take these skills, these tools, these ideas, these ways of thinking, and these ways of building to help ourselves and to also tell like, hey, you should try this, try like doing these things. But I definitely think, Taylor, like it really is about getting to a lot of the roots of some of these issues as well. But I think there's also a lot of organization and like skills and assets building.
A very big aspect of it also was networking with these groups and kind of making connections with other groups to strengthen your own movement and again bring your ideas into other groups as a whole and intersecting these ideas and bringing it all together, race, gender, sexuality, all these sort of things, so it becomes more of a cohesive group.
Any questions about anything?
So I might be wrong, so please correct me if my understanding is wrong, but my understanding is that gender is a word that came out of the English language and that we've kind of imported that word to other areas to like be like, if I went to France and said I'm gender fluid, they'd be like, would they, like, I don't know, would that word wouldn't directly translate into something, it would be a different word. And also like LGBTQ is quite a like English acronym. So I'm wondering how you feel about those like language barriers, or if you saw them come up, or if there was discussion of them at the conference.
So one thing I really like, and I feel like Colgate should be doing this, but who knows if they're ever going to do it, because anyway, in the Latino Institute, which is I actually follow them on Facebook, they're really great. They're an institute for Latino issues, queer Latino issues in particular. So they do focus on undocumented queer and other issues, other things under the umbrella. But one thing they had that I really appreciated, they had a translator and a microphone in almost everything. So like they had people translating in Spanish as someone was speaking, or they had the reverse, where they had like somebody translating in English while they're speaking in Spanish. At the same time, they've also had sign language interpreters. Yeah. So I think, I don't know for the entire thing, but at least in this one instance, these issues are presented forward. And I think they should be throughout the entire thing. I think that is something Colgate should really focus on, because I feel like, I know that me personally, I've had friends who tell me, I don't really like speaking up in class because English is not my first language. So I have to constantly think about what I'm saying and how I say it, and like, is this like, and you kind of, when you get in that mode, you feel self-conscious, you don't speak up, you're hurting yourself because you can't speak the way you need to speak, you know? It's a real issue, like, it's a real thing here at Colgate. Like, these are not just like, oh, stories I heard. Like, these are two of my personal friends who told me this, and I was like, that's fucked up. Why the fuck are we not doing anything about it? But again, Colgate is Colgate, so we'll see what happens there. But if anyone wants to sign a petition for that, I'll be happy.
Any other thoughts about that? Yeah, about the different language or identities that challenged translation?
I think it's really hard. Like, I know Spanish, and like everything in Spanish is gender. Like I can say la silla, that's like a female object. Like even there's some female, but still. So like I don't understand. Like I don't know any other way that I can speak Spanish without relying on gender terms. So it's like really difficult to like go to other cultures that speak different languages, and like when like where gender is embedded in the language or the language. So like it's I don't know how that's your question.
There definitely were some ways that we could see in action that tension between living in a gendered world but trying to break free of it or divest, right? Which is something that I learned from Allie, that divest. But so when you go up to register to just check in, they had all these labels that you can put on your name tag that had different pronouns that people can use, and I noticed some people would just have a list, just put all of the pronouns, right? It's almost the way that Bennie said, you know, any pronoun. One person introduced themselves and said that they respond to any respectable pronoun that I use, and I really like that as well. But so they had all the names so that people could just, even if it's a list, they could still have them. But they also had some that were L and ella, right, that were in Spanish. But so it was still gendered, but trying to put it in a different language, literally. I think another thing that you will see, one of the person that couldn't make it to the panel had asked me on the way over, is this the kind of conference where you can, they asked how many people can I, you know, accurately say are actually queer or LGBT identifying at this conference, and I said, I don't quite know, but I think it's generally safe to assume that most of them are. I think it's the answer. And then when she went there and spent some days, like, I think at the end I asked, so was that an accurate assumption? And she said yes. And I think it's because of the kind of ways that people are really open about their desires. Really, I see the spectrum of gender presentation and fluidity of it is represented among all the attendees. If you take note of the costumes people wear or don't wear, you know, they had an infamous workshop session, you know, the cruising opening session where it's just for cruising, just for people to sort of meet people and pick up, and so those are the ways that they sort of try to, just like culturally bring things that challenge gender, but I think more can be done. Go ahead.
So, I remember this question coming up a couple of years ago when the Two-Spirit Taino speaker came to speak.
Right.
I want to say their name was Ignacio Rivera.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, glad I remember. So I know they talked about certain language, like ele, saying instead of ella, Asia saying ele, or excuse my accent, or I've seen online, like in written, when you have like Latino, it would be like Latinx, which is what I like to say, like as a Latinx person. It's just kind of a way of like subverting,
right.
And you see that in black language too. I know, like when you have like prince or princess, like there are in the different communities that have like different languages. There are ways to like subvert and be like, or divest, as opposed to subvert.
Yeah, and I think on that note too, I think going back to Ali's original question, there's a kind of new language that's being formed. I remember the Latino is really great, so that's why I keep bringing it up. Right? It's great. They keep using the word transcendent also, which is, it's like, I don't know if this is an actual like term that has been used in the past or this is more modern, but essentially, I think what it points out is that when we don't have language for what we feel, we create this new language. And I think that's in general. Like, even in English, like, I don't think agendered or non-gendered was a thing, like, 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. So I think it's about creating this new language to be able to talk and to be able to discuss these issues. So I think, in that sense, even if there is no language currently, I think it's important for us to create a language together. I think that's what it really comes down to. And I think this kind of applies to Colgate as well. Like, if you don't have a language to, if you don't know what the language is or like how to talk about these things, let's talk about it. Let's try to figure something out together so we can get to the bottom of these issues.
I'm not really sure how to like fully word this, but we've been talking a lot about one, like inclusion, and two, how like the conference was like a really safe space and that it feels good. But I think we like often have such a large emphasis on safe spaces that then like just form rooms of like-minded people who are just agreeing on things, and like no one's really being held accountable, or people who are complicit to the system who don't realize that they aren't there. And I think that happens a lot on this campus too, for a lot of reasons, and like safe spaces are great at some points, but I think a lot of change can happen if we can move out of those. And I was wondering if you either felt that in the conference, or if you saw ways that they were maybe trying to like get around that issue, and if we could bring those here.
They did talk a lot about, in the beginnings, like thinking about your language, and they started like very much at the language level to kind of change, like make you think about what you were saying as applying to yourself, and not just kind of generalizing or putting everyone in a specific like labels, assumptions, and these sort of things. And they really encouraged you and basically kind of forced you to think critically about what you were saying and what the implications meant.
I think, that's a difficult question, I think, to answer, because I think the concept of safe space is different for everybody. I hear exactly what you're saying, that safe space is kind of something difficult to talk about, and discomfort is something important for growing. But I think at the same time, you have to consider the fact that a lot of these people are in a place of discomfort constantly. So I think that's an important issue too. I'm not saying that there wasn't any discomfort at all for anybody in the conference. I think there was like moments in which everybody had to like shift realities and like say, let's talk about these issues, let's reevaluate everything and get uncomfortable. But I think at the same time, is I think about creating a place in which where safety isn't just only one person is safe, or only one type of person is safe. I think what it was trying to do is create a place in which multiple identities don't have to be on constant guard. And I think that was the general feel of it, but I definitely think in the caucuses and like in these small discussion rooms, there was a focus on like, let's talk critically, or let's be critical. Let's put ourselves in these positions where we have to reflect on who we are, what we're thinking, and what we're doing. Because I do think those issues are important. I do think uncomfort is important, but at the same time, I want to say that I think the conference overall wanted to make sure that this was not a place where you are constantly under attack, where you can be yourself. Because I think, just thinking of like Black trans women, they're constantly under danger of everything, like, I would not want to be a Black trans woman that's in this world, like, I would not. Because I know how I feel about this world, so being in that position is just like, I don't know if I could do it. And the fact that so many trans women do it, I can't, that's a huge thing. Like, it's really difficult to be a trans person of color in this world. And I think creating a space in which they have the ability to feel safe for once is important as well. But I definitely do think on comfort and safety, there needs to be a balance to them. There needs to be a place in which you can feel comfort and discomfort equally, if that makes sense. It's complicated. It's a complicated issue.
I feel like safe spaces don't exist. I mean, I can agree with that statement, but you can create separate spaces. So for example, like me, a person of color who's queer, being in this campus that's mostly white, like you're going to a lot of meetings, like, yes, I feel safe there, but it's different. Like I would like some more color in that spaces. So like you want to, like, I think that what the conference really emphasizes that if you want to create like separate spaces, like you have to like look for them and like so look for people who have the same interests as you, and like actually hang out with them and like build relationships out of that, and like actually create your own safe space. So like that's what I did. Like I would like hang out with people who were like really cool that mostly deal with like on local queer issues. So yeah, that's my.
I definitely go there to be unsettled. I think that there are definitely times when I am too conservative, too moderate, and feel like I'm not really pushing and advocating for the very edges of the very margins of my community. And so I definitely go in order to, you know, feel what it feels like for activists to turn on my conference and take over and turn over chairs and, you know, and be like, okay, so what can I know that there are people, you know, at Colgate who are doing this, so like, how can I make it so that we're attentive to their needs? You know, I also think a lot about the privilege that I walk around with because of my identity and not knowing about, not really, like, I can read and hear a lot about the trans women of color experience, but I can never really embody it and know it the way that folks who have an identity have. And so forcing myself to sit with that privilege and that discomfort is something that I go to Create and Change for. There are hospitality suites that I always am really impressed with that I don't see at other conferences, that they have a queer people of color hospitality suite, which is just like a set of rooms that they hold as an affinity space for people of color to go and sometimes they have formal activities, but others it's, you know, self-defined. They had a Scandal marathon going on one day, so I just watched Scandal for like a whole afternoon instead of going to sessions. They've got an elder space for folks.
They have like elder.
They have a youth space, which is always like a nightclub in there, and it's just I want to go there, but I know that I can't. Right?
We went to both. We went to a lot.
So that's some ways that I'm forced to think about. You know, I think of the conference as a safe space, but even then, they have to kind of set aside even safer spaces, right? For people who have a particular vulnerable collection of activities. Other concerns, questions that people want to maybe end with? Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you all for bringing back what you brought back and shared. I'm going to just, if I might, a shameless promotional moment. There's another opportunity to come together with folks representing students, faculty, administrators, student life administrators, to come together to talk about queer concerns in a very intersectional way. It's called Expanding the Circle, and the next conference is happening in San Francisco, the 12th and 13th of November. I've had the great privilege of serving on the advisory board for the conference for 4 years. We're making a concerted effort to bring more student voices into that space. So I've created a call for papers that's been shared. Some of your faculty and other mentors on campus know about that, but if you'd like to speak to me further about taking part in Expanding the Circle in November in San Francisco, I'll stick around for a bit. But thank you. Making change is a wonderful experience, and we can only hope to inspire to kind of the same sort of done.
Well, please give a big hand for our panelists.